You could hear a pin drop when the lights went dark. It wasn't the usual organized blackout for an entrance. This was different. This was a void. In the center of the ring, the champion, Serafina, stood frozen, her victory speech cut short. The colossal arena, packed with 70,000 people, fell into a collective, suffocating hush. The champion's defiant sneer faltered, replaced by a flicker of genuine confusion. She looked left, then right, as the giant screens above her flickered and died, plunging the stadium into an eerie digital twilight. The crowd held its breath, waiting for something. Anything. This was the main event, the culmination of a year-long story. But this wasn't in the script. The silence stretched, becoming uncomfortable, then heavy, pressing down on everyone. You could feel the shared anxiety. Was it a technical error? A protest? The human brain scrambles for patterns, and in this moment, there were none. There was only the darkness, the faint outline of the champion bathed in the red glow of a single emergency exit sign, and the sound of 70,000 people holding their breath. It was a vacuum, a perfect, terrifying pause in the noise, the kind of silence that precedes either a disaster or a miracle. The champion, isolated in the ring, suddenly looked small. The boos that had rained down on her moments before were gone, replaced by this unified, questioning stillness. The world was waiting for a cue, and then the music hit. It wasn't a bombastic theme. It was a single melancholic piano note, a chord that hadn't been heard in these arenas for 3 years. The sound cut through the darkness, sharp and clean. A collective gasp, a sound like the tide being pulled out, swept the arena. You could see thousands of pinpricks of light as phones were raised, searching the entrance ramp. The piano melody looped, and then the familiar, ethereal voice began to sing. This was her song. Ilara's song. But it couldn't be. Ilara was gone. Retired. A career cut short by an injury so devastating it had become a cautionary tale. The screens flickered back to life, not with graphics, but with a single word. Reborn. The moment she stepped out, everyone knew. This night just became legendary. She wasn't in gear. She wore a simple white dress, her hair shorter than anyone remembered. She looked pale, but she was there. The roar from the crowd wasn't a cheer, it was a release, a sonic boom of pure, unadulterated shock. Grown men, captured by the panning cameras, were openly weeping. Commentators ripped off their headsets, their professionalism shattered, screaming, "Oh my God," not as a catchphrase, but as a genuine plea. This wasn't a return, this was a resurrection. And in the ring, the champion Serafina, the very woman responsible for that career-ending injury, watched her world crumble. All eyes were on Ilara, but the true story was unfolding in the center of the ring. Serafina, the undisputed queen, had built her entire championship reign on the ghost of Ilara. Her catchphrase was, "I broke the unbreakable." She had dined out on the tragedy of her former best friend for 3 solid years, using it as the foundation of her indomitable, villainous persona. And now, the ghost was standing on the ramp. The camera zoomed in on Serafina's face. It was a masterpiece of conflicting emotion. You saw the mask, the arrogance, the defiance, try to hold its place. But her eyes betrayed everything. They were wide, not with fear, but with a sudden horrifying realization. The boos she normally reveled in were gone, replaced by a deafening chorus of Ilara's name. The title she held no longer felt like a trophy. It felt like a burden, a stolen artifact. She gripped the gold plating, her knuckles turning white. This return didn't just threaten her championship. It threatened her identity. Without Ilara as the victim, who was Serafina? The crowd's reaction was the final nail. They weren't just happy to see Ilara. They were celebrating the impending downfall of the queen. The air crackled with a new narrative, one that was writing itself in real time. And in this new story, Serafina was no longer the protagonist. She was just the final boss. And for the first time, she looked like she knew she couldn't win. While the arena was electric, backstage was pure chaos. This wasn't a well-kept secret. This was a vault. Only a handful of the absolute highest-level executives knew. The producers, the writers, the technical crew, they were all caught completely off guard. In the gorilla position, the curtained-off area just behind the ramp, chaos reigned. Cameramen were scrambling. Producers were yelling into headsets, trying to redirect feeds that hadn't been planned. Get a shot of the crowd. Find her family. No, stay on the champion. Other wrestlers, their own matches finished, stopped dead in their tracks. They gathered around the monitors, their faces a mix of awe and, for some, quiet dread. A return this big doesn't just change one night. It changes the entire landscape. It changes the WrestleMania card. It changes paychecks. You could see the calculations happening behind their eyes. What does this mean for me? A young camera operator, tasked with following Ilara, found her mentor in the hallway, an old veteran producer. The producer wasn't yelling. He was just leaning against the wall, tears streaming down his face. He'd been the one to hold Ilara's hand in the ambulance 3 years ago. He looked at the camera operator and whispered, "I don't believe it. I just don't believe it." The personal impact was vibrating through the concrete walls. To understand the roar of the crowd, you have to understand the silence that came before. Not the silence in the arena, but the silence of the last 3 years. Ilara and Serafina hadn't been rivals. They were sisters. They had traveled the roads together, slept in cheap motels, and promised each other they would one day rule this industry side by side. They were the ascendants. The narrative wasn't just best friends, better enemies. It was a genuine bond that the audience had watched grow. And then, the betrayal. It happened during a tag team match. A miscommunication, or so it seemed. Ilara tagged Serafina, and Serafina simply watched. She watched as their opponents decimated Ilara. And when Ilara, broken and confused, crawled towards her corner, Serafina didn't just refuse the tag. She stepped down from the apron, picked up a steel chair, and looked her best friend in the eye. She didn't hit her. She just dropped the chair at her feet and walked away, dissolving their team, their friendship, and Ilara's career in one act of devastating indifference. Ilara, forced to finish the match alone, took a bad landing on her neck, trying to fight against the odds. The injury that ended her career wasn't from a chair shot. It was from the abandonment. It was the weight of fighting alone when she was promised she never would be. The aftermath was brutal. Ilara didn't just disappear from television, she disappeared from life. The injury was a complex cervical fracture. The first doctor told her she'd be lucky to have a normal life, let alone a normal walk. Wrestling was impossible. While Serafina was capturing championships and ascending to the throne, Ilara was in a quiet, sterile rehabilitation facility in another state. The narrative became about Serafina's ruthless ambition, but the human story was Ilara learning to hold a coffee cup again. It was months of agonizing, repetitive physical therapy. It was the psychological terror of her own body failing her. She never gave interviews. She never posted on social media. She simply vanished. The media storm was intense for a while. Why did Serafina do it? What is Ilara's condition? But the machine moves on. New stars rise. The world forgot, or was forced to. The few reports that surfaced painted a grim picture. A recluse, a broken woman defined by one moment of betrayal. Her return wasn't just a comeback to wrestling. It was a comeback to living. It was the final step of a 3-year journey through a personal hell, a journey she took completely, impossibly, in secret. That's why the crowd cried. They weren't just seeing their hero again. They were seeing someone walk out of their own tomb. The following week, the entire industry waited. The return was the single biggest story in sports. How would the company handle it? How would Ilara handle it? They didn't wait long. She was scheduled to open the show. The music hit, but this time, the crowd was prepared. The ovation was deafening, a solid 10-minute wall of sound before she could even raise the microphone. She just stood there, letting it wash over her, the first genuine smile on her face in years. When she finally spoke, her voice was different, quieter, more measured. She didn't yell. She didn't promise revenge. She just talked. She talked about the doctors. She talked about the nights she couldn't sleep, not from pain, but from the sound of Serafina's music playing on the TV in the next room. And then Serafina arrived. The champion stalked to the ring, her face a mask of controlled fury. The confrontation was immediate. Serafina circled her, microphone in hand, her voice dripping with venom. "You look good," she sneered. "For a ghost. Did you miss the spotlight? Did you get bored of being a nobody?" Elara never raised her voice. She just waited for the champion to finish, and in the silence, she said the one thing that changed everything. "I didn't come back for you, Sarah. I didn't come back for that title. I came back to finish the match you walked out on." The implication was terrifying. This wasn't about a championship. This was about an ending. The build-up to their inevitable match was unlike anything before. It wasn't a typical promotional tour. Elara refused to participate in the usual circus. She gave one sit-down interview, not with a sports journalist, but with a mainstream news anchor. The pressure was immense, and it was coming from an unexpected place, the fans. They didn't just want her to win, they needed her to. They had projected 3 years of their own pain, their own feelings of betrayal and loss, onto her. She was no longer just a wrestler, she was a symbol of resilience. She was a folk hero. But with that came an impossible standard. The legend of Elara had grown in her absence. She was remembered as an unbeatable, acrobatic marvel. But the woman in that interview was quieter. She was more grounded, literally. She couldn't do the things she used to do. Her body wouldn't allow it. The media began to question it. Is this a mistake? She's not the same. Can she really go? The pressure was no longer just from her opponent. It was from the very legacy she had built. She was now in a fight against her own shadow, against the impossible expectation of the fairy tale ending that everyone had already written for her. She had to be the hero, but she was just a human who had healed. The night of the big match, WrestleMania, the main event. The entire stadium was a sea of reborn signs. The emotional weight was palpable. This was it, the culmination of the betrayal, the injury, the recovery, and the return. We see Elara in her locker room, just moments before her entrance. She's alone. She's taping her own wrist, a ritual. A doctor, not a WWE official but her personal physical therapist who had been with her for the whole 3-year journey, stands in the doorway. He isn't smiling. "You know the risk," he says quietly. Elara doesn't look up from the tape. "I know. The scans weren't good, Elara. That neck, it's holding. But it's not the same. One bad landing. One wrong move." She finishes taping her wrist and finally looks at him. It just has to hold for one more match. The look in his eyes is one of deep professional fear. The crowd outside is chanting her name, desperate for their happy ending. They have no idea what she is risking. They see the legend. He sees the medical charts. The consequence of this return isn't just winning or losing a match. The consequence is everything. She is walking into that ring knowing that the storybook ending the fans demand could cost her the normal life she fought so hard to get back. The greatest victory was just walking again. Now, she was about to risk it all. The match was a war. It wasn't fast. It wasn't flashy. It was a brutal, slow, agonizing story. Serafina was vicious, targeting Elara's neck at every turn. Elara was resilient, fighting from underneath, using her heart when her body failed her. And in the end, she won. A roll-up. A simple, desperate 3 count. The crowd exploded. The confetti fell. The referee handed her the championship. She collapsed, holding it, tears streaming down her face as the show went off the air. It was the perfect moment, the perfect ending. But the story didn't end there. The cameras faded. The crowd began to file out. Backstage, the celebration was just beginning. But the monitors showed something strange. Ilara didn't come through the curtain. Instead, a production assistant's handheld camera caught her walking a different way. She was still in her gear, limping heavily. She walked past her own locker room, past the executives waiting to congratulate her. She reached the end of the hallway, where her physical therapist was waiting with a simple black bag. She gently handed him the championship title. Not with reverence, but with relief. He zipped it into the bag, and she just kept walking. She walked right out the arena's loading bay door and into the night, never once looking back. The realization was stunning. The return wasn't a comeback. It was a conclusion. She didn't come back to be a champion. She came back to prove she could win, to close the book on her own terms. The win wasn't the goal. The fight was. She had faced her ghost, reclaimed her story, and in her greatest triumph, she simply left. She didn't need the spotlight. She just needed to be whole.